Generative AI is here, and it has changed the rules of the game. Experts like Seth Godin and Robert McKee have been very clear. The authors who are going to make it in this business are those who are writing truly amazing, knock your socks off innovative stories. The bar is that high. AI will replace mediocre writers. But at some point, everybody is mediocre. So what do? You educate yourself. And the good news is that there's still time, but you've got to start leveling up right away. I'm Valerie Francis, and I've got a series of webinars to help you do just that. My specialty is helping authors like you put theory into practice. Understanding the tools of our trade and being able to apply them with precision is no longer an option. It's an absolute necessity. So go to valeriefrancis.ca/webinars for more information and sign up for the notifications. You can't afford not to. If you want to write stories your readers will love, there are 3 things you need to do. Understand storytelling principles, see how other writers have applied those principles, and then use them in your own work. Here on the Story Nerd podcast, our goal is to demystify story theory. We'll help you with the first 2 steps so that you can get started with the third. My name is Valerie Francis. I'm a writer and literary editor, and I focus on stories by, for, and about women.
And I'm Melanie Hill, writer, editor, and poet, and I have a passion for spy stories, fairy tales, and master detective novels.
On today's episode, Melanie pitched Everything Everywhere All at Once so that we can study world building. This 2022 film was written and directed by the Daniels. Of course, there will be spoilers because we can't talk about the movie without talking about the movie. But honestly, this week, I don't think it's going to help you. We can spoil it all we want. It's not going to help. And we would love it if you could give the show a rating and review. For Apple Podcast listeners, you can do it right from your phone. Just go to the show's landing page, scroll to the bottom, click the 5 stars. It's that simple. Melanie, what have you gotten us into this week?
Well, this movie's a bit of a ride, isn't it? Oh my gosh, it's ridiculous and confusing at different times and in equal measure, I think.
It's weird, man. It is a weird one. And just a heads up, if for anyone who hasn't seen it yet, if you are sensitive to flashing images, this might not be the movie for you. There's a lot of flashing images all the way throughout, and toward the end, maybe 3/4 the way through the movie, there's a real, I was going to say montage. It's not even a montage. Section. There's a real bit of flashing images that I couldn't watch. It made me really queasy, and I just had to close my eyes. So maybe there's some really important thing that happens in that section that I've totally missed because I close my eyes every time. Anyway, I think it might be a good choice for world building, though. I was curious to see what you came up with for world building this week.
Yeah, it is. And that's why I picked it, actually, because, my focus this season has not necessarily been on world building in terms of fantasy and science fiction. It's been around stories that are pitched in our general reality. So yes, that's why I picked it. And this is a good example of some elements of world building and probably some things not to do in world building as well. And I also picked this because it's a multiverse, right? And multiverses are very popular at the moment. Everything Everywhere grounds its multiverse by using central characters with multiple versions of themselves. So it's very similar in some ways to the Spider-Verse. Now, those characters that are reoccurring in the multiverse are Evelyn, Waymond, Joy, Gong Gong, and Deirdre. Now, the multiverse is a really fascinating idea, and it's one that's been around for over 2,500 years, right? And there's a whole branch of philosophy that actually has been around that long and looking and pondering the idea of a multiverse. But what's interesting is the variation in how the multiverse is created or how it exists. Now, the Spider-Verse is an alternative world where the radioactive spider bites a different person or a different animal. So that is how that world is sort of created. What's also interesting and different is the method to transport between the worlds, and it's part of your subcreation and world building. Now, everything everywhere is based on the concept that every time a person makes a decision, a new world is created. So, in theory, one person is at the center of the alternate universe or their alternate universe. However, this isn't a foolproof idea in this movie, and I'll go into the world building logic in Everything Everywhere a little bit later on. Now, just to recap on some fundamental ideas and terminology that I'm going to use in this episode. In episode 4 of this season, I discussed the concepts of the primary world and the secondary world and I got those from the book Building Imaginary Worlds by Mark J.P. Wolf. Now, the primary world is the world in which we live, right? And the secondary world are all the imaginary worlds or the versions of the primary world that we see in stories. Now, the most fascinating aspect of the idea of a primary world and a secondary world is that they belong on a spectrum, with the reference point being the primary world. Now, world building is an activity based on how far the fictional world moves away from the primary world. And I'm recapping this because it's really important in my analysis this week. Now, I chose Everything Everywhere this week because it is set in the primary world, and it's a great example of establishing the primary world, which is our world or the protagonist's world, and then it introduces many secondary worlds that fit on a spectrum that shifts away from the primary world. So when we think about the spectrum of possible secondary worlds, a multiverse is a good example of the range of infinite secondary world possibilities. All right, so here are some basic steps that I've noticed just in my study this season and in the books that I've been reading about a multiverse or having a multiverse in your story. So first of all, we need to understand the character's primary world. Now, in Everything Everywhere, this is easily done because of the setting, right? And it's also because we see a lot of Evelyn's facial expressions, and we can see how she speaks to everyone in her family, and her customers. And we really get a feeling of her situation also in the tax office with Deirdre. So that primary world is, I think, very quickly and very easily established in this movie. But at the same time, the audience becomes aware that there is something odd going on in Evelyn's world that she is not aware of. And we see that when the surveillance camera in their lounge room suddenly glitches and comes up with the text saying finding route, and then it shows Wayland parkouring around the shop. And we see it, but Evelyn doesn't. So we are aware that there is something weird going on in her primary world that she's not aware of. Now, another thing to think about when you're doing world building or multiverse building is introducing the idea of the multiverse, right? So the protagonist is usually surprised when they discover the multiverse exists. And we see how surprised Evelyn is when Alpha Waymond arrives. It takes Evelyn quite a while to understand and accept that there is a multiverse and that she has a role in saving all of the possible worlds against Jobu Tupaki. Now, the third point is, and I mentioned this before, the exit and entry into the other worlds. Now, it's important that the protagonist and the audience understand how to get into and how to leave the other worlds, and also how much control the protagonist has over this. Now, I have to say that Everything Everywhere has a complex method of entry and exit when compared to other stories like, The Lion, the Witch and the Wardrobe. And I'll talk a bit more later about how the exit and entry works in this movie and why I think it's complicated and maybe doesn't work the way that we expect it to. Now, we also need to have an explanation of the multiverse and how the characters operate within it. And this is where subcreation comes into building your world. Now, the further away from the primary world you are, then you must spend time explaining your world and how you've built that world. So, how is this done in Everything Everywhere? Well, it's done mainly via a mix of dialogue, action, and decision points. Right, so the world is built with dialogue as straight exposition. So Alpha Waymond explains to Evelyn why he's there and that he needs her help. Now, Alpha Waymond also explains that a world is created whenever Evelyn makes a decision, and this in turn creates a branching universe. He also explains how to use technology to slingshot into the multiple alternate worlds, and he gives Evelyn the equipment that she needs to access those worlds. Now, Joku's black bagel is also a trigger for exposition or dialogue as exposition, because that prompts Joku to explain what her object of desire is. And it is all revealed in the white bagel world after Evelyn has become like Joku. So my point there is that the dialogue and exposition is continual through the movie, and it needs to be continual as Evelyn extends and understands the multiverse throughout the movie. And I actually realised after watching it a couple of times that is actually Alpha Waymond's job. He's there pretty much to be the exposition talking head about how to navigate not only the multiverse for Evelyn, but also for us as the viewers. All right, there is also dialogue used as ammunition. And this really happens in one particular part of the movie where it is really obvious. And I actually think this is a really good part of the movie and a good example of dialogue as ammunition. And this is when Alpha Gong Gong and Alpha Waymond explain to Evelyn who Joku is and how Alpha Evelyn created Joku. Now, this ups the stakes for Evelyn because she is being asked, we realise, to kill her own daughter. Now, there's also action. So action is the supporting thing that the characters are doing with or without dialogue. So we see, for example, that Alpha Waylon puts the earpieces on Evelyn and sets up a phone to map into her brain. So that is world building as well as by action, not only by dialogue. And we also see on the screen how the decision points that Evelyn has made, how they branch off and create the alternate worlds when she's actually flashbacking. I think I'll use that term, when there's a flashback that actually shows points in her life where her decisions have split off and created the world that she's in now. That leads into the decision points, right? So this is another way that the world is built in this particular movie. And this is where Evelyn is in between making decisions. So there are points where the story really stops or pauses when Evelyn has to make a choice. So for example, when the family are in the tax office and one Evelyn is in the cleaning cupboard and the other Evelyn is in the interview with Deirdre. So this is the limbo point, and it's before the world splits into another alternate. And this builds the world because of the rules that Alpha Waymond has set up. So Evelyn's decision and the split worlds that we see at this point in the movie are essential to the ending of the movie. And again, it gets very complicated, and sometimes it's very difficult to track what decision points are and how they impact the rest of the story. So hang on, bear with me. Come with me on this trippy journey. Now, there are more basic considerations, but those were the most obvious to me. But this brings me to my first thoughts on subcreation logic and some problems we can run into with the multiverse. So one of the problems that I faced was when Wayman explained how the worlds are created. Now, if the explanation given by Alpha Wayman is true, and that is that each decision you make creates a split and results in an alternate world, then how do we account for the worlds where Evelyn has sausage fingers? How do we account for the Ratatouille world, the pinatas, and the list goes on? The answer that I came up with, it's because of the absurdist elements in the film. And these absurdist elements remove the common physics and the logic from the multiverse. So the absurdist elements are first introduced, I think, when Alpha Wayman eats the lip balm. And then they continue to pop up in the movie, with hands and arms changing into other things, Jobu's costumes, and I think the bagel is also evidence of the absurdist nature of the film as well. Now, the implication is that Jobu's infinite knowledge of the multiverse somehow gives her the ability to change matter. Now, this has to be absurdist because there is no explanation given as to why she can do this, in contrast to the rules that Alpha Wayman has set up for us when he's talking to Evelyn. So Jobu also moves through the multiverse differently. So she doesn't need the earpieces, the phone, and the unexpected action to jump into the multiple worlds, right? And this is where it starts to get a bit trippy as well, right? Because each slingshot that a person makes, so this is when they move between worlds, is considered a fracture in the mind. So the more splits creates more stress for a character's mind. And that's where Jobu is. So she understands everything everywhere, and her mind didn't break and it didn't kill her. It just meant that she is fractured into multiple pieces. And then we see Evelyn sort of going on this same journey as well, but she is not adept as Jobu yet when we first see it. And when she starts to want to stay in an alternate world, then Wayman actually says to her that she will invite contradictions into her mind, and her mind will not be able to deal with it and it will kill her. And so we understand, or start to understand, that the overloaded mind dies. But again, that doesn't happen with Jobu. Hers has fractured. So her mind is everywhere all at once, and she has the knowledge and the power of the multiverse. And this is where the rule building in this story really starts to be difficult to follow or understand if you think about it too much. And I obviously have thought about this too much, right? Now, while there is a lot of exposition and action that establishes the rules for the multiverse, Jobu and Evelyn operate outside of those rules. So, Valerie, I just wanted to pause there and see what you thought of this, and do you think that that works? And if so, why? Or if not, why not?
Well, the thing to remember, or the thing to notice about Everything Everywhere All at Once, is that it's an antiplot form. And when we understand that, I'm not going to say the movie makes sense, because there is no universe within the multiverse in which this movie actually makes sense, okay? But it's the kind of movie that you have to just surrender yourself to right from the beginning and go with the flow. If you resist any of the story, then it makes you kind of cranky. Or if not cranky, then confused. Because just like you said, it contradicts itself. Now, if you think back to the season that we did where I was studying, I think I called it plot structure. I don't like that term. The shape of the story. I came up with that term as well. And actually, Robert McKee has started to use that language as well, the shape of the story. I like that best. That's where we talked about arc plot, mini plot, and antiplot. Most audiences or readers approach a story with the expectation that it's an arc plot story, because that's what we think of when we think of stories. That's what we're expecting. So if you watch Everything Everywhere All at Once with that expectation, it becomes very confusing, very weird, very hard to follow. When you realize it's anti-plot, it's still weird, but at least you understand what's happening, because with an arc plot story and even a mini plot story, it has to have a consistent reality. That's one of the features of those types of stories. With an anti-plot, it doesn't have to have a consistent reality. So it can establish the world exactly like you said, Melanie. Everything you said, I totally agree with. But then it can break its own rules. I'm not a big fan of anti-plot. I'll be perfectly honest, because my life is too short to spend it watching anti-plot movies or reading absurdist novels. It just does not float my boat. I agree with you, Melanie. It does establish the rules of the multiverse. It does break those rules of the multiverse, which I find irritating, but is not unusual in an anti-plot story because there's no requirement for it to have a consistent reality. What do you think of that?
No, I agree. But then I do question, why bother setting the rules in the first place? Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, I can't argue with you on that at all.
I don't
No.
understand then on that. So, especially if you're going to use a frame of a multiverse, which needs a level of explanation, again, if you think too much about it, you really starts to come undone very quickly.
And you talked about the level of exposition.
Mm.
This is a fully expositional story,
Mm-hmm.
which bothers me tremendously.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of emphasis and attention on fight scenes.
Mm-hmm.
It's mostly fight scenes. After the first half an hour, it's mostly fight scenes.
Yeah.
With a little bit of dialogue clicking them together, like links between Lego blocks.
Mm-hmm.
The dialogue is entirely exposition because there's no room to have working scenes that reveal what's happening to the viewer. You just got to tell them what's happening so you can get to the next fight scene.
Yes.
But yeah, I don't like why go through all this work to establish a world if you're going to then just chuck it all out the window and do your own thing anyway. I don't know.
All right. Now, the theory of a multiverse is that it has infinite possibilities. And while we see many worlds in Everything Everywhere, there are some that have more of a purpose than others. And I just want to take you through this because I think that this is also important in the story itself, because not all of the alternate worlds are equal. Some are just there as to be there, and there are some that actually flow through and have meaning for the rest of the story. Now, and there's about 7 or 8 that I've picked out that I think have more oomph, I suppose, for want of better words, than other worlds that we see. So the first one is Evelyn's primary world, right? So this is the home of the worst version of Evelyn. So she is the most unsuccessful version of Evelyn. This is the world where Waymond puts forward a case for kindness and seeing the good in everything. It is also where all the action converges for the climactic moment. Then secondly, we have the Alphaverse, and this is where Alpha Evelyn created the ability to contact other branches in the universe. And we see Alpha's Waymond, Alpha's Gong Gong, and Jobu Tupaki. They all come from this world. And it's interesting to note that Alpha Waymond has actually seen many Evelyns die in many different worlds as a result of Jobu Tupaki's attempt to find someone who is like her. Anyway, it does start to get very complicated very quickly. And it is worth noting that this is where Jobu Tupaki originated as the result of Alpha Evelyn's experiment to travel into the multiverse. Thirdly, we have the white world of the black bagel, and this is all of Alpha Joy's, and Alpha Joy is Jobu Tupaki. It is the summation of her pain and confusion, and it is in this world where she reveals what her want is, and her want is to see if she can actually die and not exist and know what all these other Alpha Joys are experiencing all at once. Anyway, it is a reasonably important, I think, world, even if it doesn't make much sense when you go there. Right, the fourth one is the local divergent world, where Evelyn goes home to finish her taxes. So this is the point of the split that I mentioned before. So this world splits in two when Evelyn decides not to deliver the taxes before the party. And it's also where Deirdre calls Evelyn and Evelyn tells her to shut up. So Evelyn also signs the divorce papers, and Deirdre arrives to seize the laundromat, and Evelyn turns into a rock and then comes back. Wayman gets a week's extension. So this is also an important world, or a version of the world, in terms of the story as well, because there is a lot of action that happens there. Now, there's also a variation in this world, and I've called it 4-point alpha, and this is where Evelyn does decide to deliver the taxes, and this is the world where Joku learns that Evelyn has become her. Again, it's important for the story in terms of what's happening and what's going on. Then we have the fifth world, which is the Kung Fu Evelyn world. So this is the world where Evelyn has become a movie star as a result of not going with Wayman to the US. But she does meet up with a different version of Wayman later on. Now, the purpose of this world is to show Evelyn what she has missed out on by not going with Wayman, and that becomes very important at the climax of the movie itself. We have the sixth world, which is the sausage hands world, which is also off the map. So, and this is the map of the known worlds of Evelyn and the decision branches that happen to create those worlds. So the sausage hands world is where we sort of start to see some of the absurdist worlds come in. And they actually do, in the movie, go and give a bit of an explanation of how that world happened. And it was created based on the evolution of apes with sausage fingers that killed off the apes without sausage fingers. So I don't know why this world has an origin story when maybe some of the other alternative or absurdist worlds don't. But anyway, this is the universe where Evelyn is in a relationship with Deirdre. Now, Evelyn draws on this in the primary world, and it's where she gets empathy for Deirdre. And she also starts to get maybe some empathy with Joy, because in the primary world, Evelyn doesn't approve of Joy's partner, Becky. Well, she doesn't approve of the relationship. It's not so much that she doesn't approve of Becky. So this world also teaches Evelyn how to use her feet when her hands are tied. So it has relevance in the rest of the story, even as gross as that particular world is, in my opinion. Now, there are also other worlds, right? And we see multiple world jumps. We see different things. Sometimes Evelyn sounds like Waymond. Sometimes she speaks like a bird. Then she's a cleaner. She finds out about a hidden room. There's the pizza board advertising Evelyn. They become a children's drawing, and Evelyn and Joy become pinatas. So this actually serves to show how large and how abstract the multiverse could be and is in this particular story. And then the eighth one that I've sort of identified is the Chinese chef version of Evelyn, where she has or acquires the knife skills. Now, this is the Rakakuni world as well, and I don't know, apart from the knife skills, I don't really know how the rest of that world ties into the main story, but I think it has to do a little bit with empathy. But anyway, it got a reasonable amount of airtime. I think it was meant to be funny. I'm not sure if it was or if it wasn't, but she did get knife skills out of that particular world. Now, all of these worlds converge at the point where Joku is trying to persuade Evelyn to go with her into the Black Bagel to see if she can die. Now, Joku is showing Evelyn what it's like to live in a multiverse with all the worlds vying for attention. And then Evelyn fully understands Joku then when Joku shows her this. And that's when we see the 9th world, which is the rock world. And this is the silence of the two rocks coexisting in an alternative to the noise and the chaos of listening to all the multiverse all at once. Now, here again, we can see where some of the logic of this multiverse reaches into the absurd. So in the rock world, Rock Evelyn telepathically asks Rock Joy, "Where are we?" And Rock Joy responds, "They are in," and I quote, "one of the universes where all the conditions weren't right for life to form. And then most of them are like this actually," end quote. Now, this sent me into a bit of an existential spiral where I questioned consciousness, language, and communication. So it also defies the logic of the multiverse if we go back to what Wayman explained to Joy at the beginning of the movie, which was every other decision that you make creates a branching universe, which implies that we need people to make decisions to create other worlds in the multiverse. However, this doesn't happen. And the rock world is one of the examples of where this doesn't happen. Anyway, and this scene, the rock world, also goes down the path of philosophical thinking regarding the infinite possibilities of the multiple universes. And again, I thought too hard about this because it became problematic for me, because the rules that Wayman explained about decision points and creating alternative primary worlds, and then the altered realities that Joku and Evelyn experience outside of the alternate primary worlds, the cartoons, the kids' drawings, everything shatters in this scene. And I could not suspend my disbelief anymore at this point in the movie. Now, the absurdity in the film probably establishes an expectation for the viewer that the multiverse doesn't need to make sense. However, this would be on the nose in any other story where the rules of the multiverse have been explained prior to experiencing the story. Now, despite all of the chaos, the infinite possibilities, and the theme in this movie of the roads not travelled, there is maybe sort of a coherent story for Evelyn. I think there is. I think she learns some things, but it is pieced together like a jigsaw, and it requires Wayman as the anchor point, right? Because despite all of the roads not taken, the various Waymans don't deviate a great deal in any of the universes or any of the worlds. And the one who does diverge the most, which is the Alpha Wayman, he gets killed. So Wayman becomes a central grounding figure in this movie despite all of the chaos. So it's just worth noting that he does remain fairly consistent as a character while the rest of the chaos goes on around him. And that happens in multiple worlds as well. Now, I'll go on and quickly summarise in a minute, but there is one thing that I did notice as well, that there are many, many references to Matrix in this film. And it's interesting to note that, right? Because The Matrix has two worlds, and this movie has multiple worlds. So if you watch this film with The Matrix in mind, you will see how much of it refers back to The Matrix at certain points in time. Anyway, just something that I noticed, and something that's interesting in comparison in terms of the different functions of the worlds in those movies. Now, just in summary, there is a lot in this week's episode regarding world building in a multiverse. And my top 3 takeaways are that you need to establish the main world of the protagonist. Then you can select the worlds that you show based on how they support the story. And what I have really learnt this week, even though this is an absurdist story, that if you create rules in your multiverse, I believe that you must follow them. Anyway, that is my very long wrap up of the world building in a multiverse based on Everything Everywhere All at Once. Valerie, how did you go with character this week?
Okay. Well, as I said, it's antiplot. It's a farce. It's satire of science fiction. And on an intellectual level, I can understand what's happening here. But it's not my type of humor. Of course, now that is a subjective opinion. It's not my objective assessment of the craft. There are plenty of people who love this movie. It won, I think, 7 Oscars. So, it's happening for somebody. It's just not happening for me. I get it on a certain level, kind of, sort of. For example, I can see the satire in an IRS agent winning awards that look like butt plugs. IRS agents are anal, right? I mean, that's the joke. Ha, ha, ha. But I don't understand why a butt plug as a launching pad is funny. You have this story. Maybe this is just going to expose a big failing in me and my ability to comprehend this stuff. I don't know. But you have the story that is going out of its way to be art. And we've got to go with it for its artistry. And it's going to only really apply to a few people who are super into this stuff. And then it trickles down to the other people who, in my opinion, think that they must be missing something. And so they're going to like it too because the other people that they look up to like it. But then you have this 12-year-old boy humor. So I don't know what to make of that. But I can put all that aside. I can go with it and say, okay, that's the artistry. That's my subjective opinion. It doesn't mean that it's not a working story. That subjectively it's not for me. I can put all of that aside. But what I have the biggest problem with is that there is so little story in this movie that it didn't hold my attention. I'm all about the story, obviously. This film, as we've already talked about, is primarily exposition and action scenes. So in terms of character development, I don't have a huge amount to say. Forget about trying to identify a genre. It's antiplot, so you're not going to pigeonhole it into anything. But it is a movie about Evelyn as a mother and a daughter and a wife. And it's about her relationship with her own daughter and her father and her husband. Her father has been hypercritical of her and Wayman. And so she, in turn, is hypercritical of Joy and Wayman. She's a very unhappy woman who feels that she has missed every opportunity to make something of her life. And you know what? She is right. She has. That is why Alpha Wayman has chosen her. So the goal here, in terms of object of desire, the goal here for this movie is for Evelyn to match the great evil, which has begun, spreading throughout chaos throughout all of the many universes, throughout the multiverse. Jobu is so evil and is spreading evil everywhere that Evelyn has to spread good everywhere. But what she is doing for most of the movie is fighting fire with fire. It's aggression, it's anger, it's all that kind of stuff. In the end, when she follows Wayman's example to be kind, that is when she neutralizes Jobu's evil effect on the world, right? So the first 12 minutes of the movie are kind of like a little prologue, and it establishes Evelyn's character. We see this is the most story-like part of the whole movie. We see that Evelyn can't speak to her daughter. She cannot talk about her emotions. And this is really driven home in the scene where Joy gets in the car and Evelyn wants to talk to her, and all she can say is, "You're getting fat." And this is a scene that is mirrored. If you go back to the season we did on beginnings and endings, we talked about mirroring the beginning and ending. So this scene where Joy is getting in the car and Evelyn tries to talk to her, this is mirrored at the end of the story. So in the beginning, in this first 12 minutes, we also see that Evelyn's really quite afraid of her father. She is annoyed by her husband, shows him no respect whatsoever, and she's just generally unhappy. And she's frantic, and she's angry, and she's chaotic, and all that kind of stuff. Then we have this section called Everything, and it takes about an hour and 15 minutes to play. And in this section, okay, so it takes about 14 minutes for the multiverse to open up to Evelyn. So that means that for the first 30 minutes or so, it's the primary world, which makes sense because when the multiverse opens up, that kind of marks the second act, right? The protagonist crossing over into the extraordinary world, because that's where her character will change. Remember how the 3 acts break down with respect to character development. Now, this is a bit of an oversimplification, but what odds? It's a great starting point when we're thinking about character development and its relationship to plot. So let's just go for it. In a 3-act structure, 3 acts being a beginning, a middle, and an end, Act 1, or the beginning of the story, shows the character in her before state. Act 3, or the end of your story, shows the character in her after state. Act 2, then, the middle of your story, this is the process by which your character either changes or is revealed to the reader or audience. All right, so far, so good. But it's at this 30-minute mark that the action scenes begin and the exposition kicks into high gear. Because there are few, if any, working scenes, Evelyn's evolution or her revelation or her change, depending on how you want to look at it, is told to us. And in my opinion, that is not nearly as interesting or satisfying as it could have been. So what's happening here is that Evelyn is coming face to face with the idea that she has not lived up to her potential, that she has squandered every opportunity life has given her. And as you'd expect, as this section begins, there's some glimmer that Evelyn wants to be more, that she yearns for something more. She says she's not ready to fight, yet she does try to fight, but it's at the wrong time and the wrong place, and it makes total sense for where the action occurs in the film. This might be the only thing that makes total sense. Remember, as Act 2 of a story begins, the protagonist doesn't know how the extraordinary world works. She does not know who's who in the zoo. She doesn't know how to act. So she approaches the extraordinary world as though it were the ordinary world. And in the ordinary world, Evelyn charges forward. She does not listen to Wayman. She just does her thing. Now, because the character development happens between these action scenes, we just get little snippets. And we don't really know why Evelyn is the way she is, why she acts the way she acts. If you follow the flashes between the universes, you can kind of thread something together. But you got to really pay close attention. So in a nutshell, Evelyn is treating Joy exactly the way her father has treated her, which is with a lot of criticism, a lot of harsh criticism. Evelyn's father, no matter what Evelyn does, it's not good enough. She is not good enough. It's just always harsh criticism. And so that is how she is treating Joy. When Alpha Wayman approaches primary Evelyn, I don't know how to keep these characters straight. I'm going to call her primary Evelyn and Alpha Evelyn, and primary Wayman and Alpha Wayman, because it's just so confusing. Alpha Wayman says to primary Evelyn, Come with me and live up to your ultimate potential, or you can lie here and live with the consequences. And primary Evelyn says, I want to lie here. So if we think about a character's reveal through action under pressure, this is one of the earliest pressure points on Evelyn. So what does she do? Resists change. Even though there's a glimmer when we saw her initially in the first act, when she wasn't able to speak with her daughter, we saw in her face that she really wished she could talk about her emotions. She wished she could be different. Here she has an opportunity to be different and she doesn't want to do it. Now, if you think about the hero's journey, this would be refusal of the call. Typically what happens is that the protagonist eventually decides that they need to go on the adventure, and so they're an active participant in what happens to them. But here, Alpha Wayman picks her up and carries her away. He won't let her lie there. He's forcing her to go on the adventure. So in this section of the film, I'm just going to keep going here with Evelyn's relationship to Wayman. And she flashes through, her various options of life, what her life could have been. And she says to Wayman, I saw my life without you. It was beautiful. I should have listened to my father. And then Alpha Wayman comes in and she's like, no, let me finish talking to my husband, primary Wayman, because he needs to know how good my life could have been. Now, primary Wayman wants to divorce primary Evelyn. That's another thread that's going on. And this continues throughout the whole story. Meanwhile, at this point, primary Evelyn is really still being harsh with respect to Joy. She does not yet know that Jobu is Joy and that Alpha Evelyn has actually created her by being so harsh on her. So if we look at the relationship between Evelyn and her father and her daughter, by behaving the way her father has behaved, Alpha Evelyn creates a monster, essentially, by being so harsh on her daughter and creating this Jobu character who is spreading evil throughout the multiverse. And there comes a point when Alpha Gong Gong says to primary Evelyn, you got to kill Joy because that's the only way of saving the multiverse. Now, this is another point of pressure for Evelyn, for primary Evelyn. If characters reveal through action under pressure, what does this moment reveal about Evelyn? And it reveals that she truly does love her daughter. And we saw that at the beginning. She truly does wish that she can open up and speak to her daughter. Here's a point where she has an opportunity to show her love for her daughter. She will not sacrifice Joy the way her father will sacrifice her. And what this means is that she continues to fight Jobu in an effort to free her daughter, Joy. As a result, Evelyn spirals, just like Jobu. She becomes very much like Jobu. Just as Melanie said, she exists everywhere all at once. And she believes nothing matters, and she signs the divorce papers. She's not running from it anymore. She exposes Rakakuni. There are a number of worlds in which she kills Wayman in various different ways. She stabs him, she chokes him, she smacks him in the face. She does all kinds of horrible things to Wayman. She allows the laundromat to be seized, and basically she takes a baseball bat to her life because it's all meaningless. Then there is another moment of pressure. And this is Wayman's be kind message. It's so the climax of the whole movie where it's a big showdown between primary Evelyn and Jobu, and she's trying to fight fire with fire, and it's not working. She's getting further and further away from who she is. Then we have Wayman's big be kind message, and this is another point of pressure for Evelyn. Because what's at stake here, and Melanie, you talked about this already, what's at stake here is her daughter's soul. Is she going to be able to free Joy from this creature Jobu or not. Her instinct is to fight physically. And this is what she's been doing. She's been ignoring Wayman. She has been behaving like the Evelyn that she was at the very beginning of the movie. This is the all is lost moment, which is always followed by an epiphany. This all is lost moment for a character is the moment when they change, because they realize that their approach to their problem is not working. The only way that they can win at the end to get their object of desire is by changing their approach. Changing their approach means changing who they are. This comes with Wayman's big "be kind" speech. And Evelyn does change her approach. So the room is filled with all these minions of Jobu. I don't know what else to call them. And she approaches them one by one and shows each one of them love in the way that they need to receive love. It's all wacky, very wacky, super wacky, but you kind of got to go with it and see that this is Evelyn's evolution. And she even says to Gong Gong, I'm no longer willing to do to my daughter what you did to me. This is huge because Evelyn no longer needs her father's approval. She no longer judges Joy and doesn't see Joy as lacking or as failing or as having weaknesses. She also sees Wayman a different way. And it's because there's a Wayman in another universe where the be kind speech starts. And he explains, this is just my approach to the world. It doesn't mean I'm naive. It doesn't mean that I'm simple-minded or stupid or any of those kinds of things. I see what's going on in the world. This is how I handle it. I decide to fight by being kind. So then eventually we get to the repeat of the car scene with Joy. And finally, this time, Evelyn is able to say what's on her mind. So she's a very different woman at the end than she was at the beginning. So is there character development or character revelation in Everything Everywhere All at Once? Yes, there is. But you kind of have to just go with it because we're getting snapshots of her between all these action scenes. If you want, you can watch it a dozen times and go through all of the flashbacks or the flashes to the other universes and try and weave the thread. But it's antiplot, so it may not work. Again, you just got to go with this film and enjoy it and say, wow, that was an amazing 2.5 hours of my time. Or you scratch your head and say, I don't really think I want to write an antiplot story. Anyway, that's my story that I am sticking to. Melanie, what's today's action step?
All right, the action step for this week, and I'm primarily talking about world building, right, in this action step. So this week I want you to look at the characters that are common in your primary and secondary worlds and identify how the characters are different or similar in those worlds, and see if that's consistent in the type of story that you're building or that you want to create.
Phew, well, that wraps it up for this week. Join us again next week when we discuss Big. It's like balm for the soul after this week. To support the show, please leave us a rating and review and tell your writer friends about us. For access to writing templates and worksheets and more than 70 hours of training, subscribe to my Inner Circle by visiting valeriefrancis.ca/inner circle and follow me on Twitter and Instagram and Threads at Valerie_Francis. If you'd like to get Melanie's tips about books to help you read like a writer, visit her on Facebook and Instagram under Melanie Hill Author, or find out more about her at melaniehill.com.au. And remember, story theory doesn't have to be difficult. It's a tool to help you write more, not less. So take it one step at a time and have fun.